see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Jim, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview, or it's kind of a dialogue about how we can build a culture of empathy. And it looks like you came straight from the operating room there. And you're a clinical professor in the Department of Neurosurgery at Stanford University, and you're also the founder and director of the Center for Compassion, Altruism Research and Education, or CCARE for short.
Yes, and before we start, let me just thank you for all the work you're doing and your passion and dedication to this field of endeavor. But yes, you are correct. My day job is being a brain spine surgeon, and one of my passions certainly is trying to understand the neuroscience of compassion and how to potentiate those behaviors in others, not only for the sake of others, but also for the sake of the individual.
Well, thank you for those kind words about the work I'm doing as well. And I just saw you had given a talk at the Wisdom 2.0 conference, and it was a very elegant talk that you gave about the problems we have in society and how you feel that compassion is the solution. So I would recommend that anyone seeing this actually see that video of that before even seeing this, because it's such an eloquent talk. So thank you for having presented that so nicely.
Well, I appreciate that. You know, one of the challenges, I think, for all of us, number one is how do we quiet our minds so that we can listen? And then I think beyond quieting our mind and doing our best to live in the present moment, which certainly a mindfulness meditation practice can help one with and has significant benefit. And the core of what I was talking about in that Wisdom 2.0 talk is, while those things are wonderful within themselves, those types of practices oftentimes, while very beneficial, lead to a isolation, and while transformative, if they don't have a component in which you engage outwardly with others, they can sometimes be a narcissistic or self-absorbing exercise that on some level can be helpful, but in the long term cannot. And I think for many people, the core of how they want to feel, or the core of how they want to live, is to have a connection with others and to be part of something bigger than themselves. In fact, if you look at almost every movie where there are heroes and there are people who are going beyond themselves, almost invariably they involve engaging in something which helps the whole and society at large. And at our core, I think that's what we wish to do and what gives most people the greatest satisfaction, although sometimes the path to understanding that can be long and difficult, because so many of us carry baggage that from our childhoods or from events that have happened in the past that result in us not seeing this as clearly, or not recognizing that that will give ultimate fulfillment. We spend so much time dealing with either the effects of how we've been treated in the past or the effects of events that have occurred, which is this rumination on the past, versus living in the present and taking the time to listen and connect with others. And I think that's really the challenge. One of the things that I frequently comment on, and this is not something that I necessarily came with up on myself, but I think others have understood and have commented on, is that our evolution, if you believe in evolution, has allowed us to abstractly think, to have language, to have a theory of mind. But the price we have paid for that, unlike, if you will, other mammals, is that most mammals live absolutely at the present moment. There is no rumination about the past because there is no past. There's no thinking about the future because they are here and they don't even know if there will be a future. While our development of our cortex has resulted in us having a recognition of a past or a memory of the past, and with that comes thinking about and spending a lot of energy ruminating about what could have been, what should have been, what might have been, and it distracts us from either connecting with others or living now. Or the other side of that is thinking about the future, and once somebody thinks about the future, that implies uncertainty because none of us have a crystal ball. Uncertainty oftentimes leads to stress because you have anxiety because you do not know what the future holds. And both of these result in us not being here. And when I say not being here, I mean with the person in front of you being 100% focused on them and sharing with them and feeling them versus part of you being somewhere else the majority of the time.
Okay, so it sounded like you were starting off by saying that that with the mindfulness community is about kind of mindfulness of what's going on inside of ourselves, but that's maybe like a gateway to connecting, like that's kind of, and transformation is connecting with others and being present with others, like you and I are now here across from each other, and how can we deepen that sense of presence with each other?
No, I think that's exactly right. What I say is, well, mindfulness can result in transformation whereby you are more efficient, you have greater insight, you're living in the present moment. It doesn't necessarily, without a compassion component, lead to transcendence, which is this connection or recognition of a connection to everything or all living beings, or as some people say, all sentient beings. You know, it's interesting because if you go back to the ancient traditions and where many of these practices arose, there is invariably a discussion about connecting with others and serving others and understanding that suffering is universal and everyone is universal. The problem has been sometimes in the West is that people have parsed off components of this for specific reasons, and then they don't focus on the somewhat larger picture, which is, why are you doing this all anyway? And I would submit to you that the reason we should all be doing this is so that in our own way and to each of our ability, that we serve others by decreasing their suffering, and that will ultimately lead to our own transcendence, and if you will, and I'm not a particularly religious person, but some people would say enlightenment. I also believe that if you look at all the evidence, best evidence we have today, from a science perspective, by caring for others, by empathizing with others, by understanding their suffering and that they are in fact suffering, it allows you to go to a different place. It allows you not to concentrate or ruminate over your own issues. It allows you to get outside of yourself. It allows you to recognize there is a larger world. And by doing so, it has a significant impact on your own stress in a positive way. It has a significant impact on improving your immune system. And there are all sorts of measures that we see that by being compassionate are improved by, if you will, a compassionate practice or being compassionate.
Yeah, so at the end of your talk, you said we're at a tipping point, and that's where your Wisdom 2.0 talk kind of left off. Is like society, and I think that you're meaning society is at a tipping point right now. And I wonder if you could maybe expound a little bit or go into that. And I'm kind of imagining that if we don't start having more empathy and compassion, I mean, things look kind of bleak for humanity.
Well, I think that is correct. I think that when I say we're at a tipping point, I think there are a couple of issues. One is people use the term the butterfly effect, where one event in one part of the world can potentially have a profound effect on another part of the world. And we simply need to look at the news to understand that reality, whether it's in the context of food issues, weapons, war, global catastrophes. We are all connected, and so many of these things are impactful far beyond what we can even understand, that unless the world, if you will, and that means everyone, looks at this not to the benefit of just your community, or if you will, and in science we use the term your in-group, but understand that when we look at our in-group, or those who we care about or feel like protecting, if you will, it can no longer be your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, your aunt, or your uncle. When you look out at others, you have to recognize that, in fact, they are your brother and your sister, whether they're 100 miles away, next door, or across the ocean. Because at the end of the day, their actions and your actions are going to have some sort of an impact. And it's not an impact where in, let's say, the 15th or the 16th century, where you would have to go on a ship for months and months at a time and with small numbers of people, and your impact on a society oftentimes would be negligible. We are doing actions that those impacts can be immediately deleterious, and we have to recognize that. And so the other side of the coin is not only this concept of globalization and connectedness in that context, but it's also a recognition that the practices that man has examined and created and refined over the last multiple millennia are or were created for a reason and have significant benefit. And while each of them may have some sort of baggage associated with what we would normally say is a religious practice, fundamentally, once you strip off that baggage, a great deal of time has been spent understanding how to develop the key that will open up your mind to potentiate yourself. And that means improving your mind, having focus, recognizing your global connectedness, and also that you have an obligation for your own happiness to be concerned about the happiness of others.
Well, from my quest, I've had my long quest traveling around the world being sort of a seeker. And from my kind of exploration, I kind of came to empathy as kind of being, at least for myself, kind of the core of what I was really searching for, is that sense of connection and kind of the gateway to love and compassion. And so that's kind of why I've kind of set on this path and kind of a bit obsessed about how can we build a culture of empathy and compassion? How can we transform society to raise the value of empathy within society? And one thing I'm finding is there's a bit of confusion about definitions. It's like, for example, Barack Obama said he was going to choose a Supreme Court justice, and one of the qualities he was wanting was empathy. And senators like Jeff Sessions were saying, "What is empathy? You know, what is this all about?" There's an effort to bring empathy into the schools, and Phyllis Schafferly wrote a piece on her site, the Freedom Forum, I believe, or Eagle Forum. It's like, we don't need empathy in the schools. It's like there's no clear definition of what empathy is. And so even among the empathy and, you know, compassion community, I sense a lot of kind of confusion, you know, lack of clarity about what these definitions are. And one way I kind of find interesting to look at definitions is through metaphors. It's like, you know, the empathy is often defined as the metaphor of standing in someone else's shoes, looking through someone else's eyes. So I'm wondering if you have any personal metaphors, and you can't use those, of what is empathy like to you and what is compassion like in kind of a metaphorical sense.
Well, now you're putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
I tell you what we often use in the context of science. I think most people, as you point out, this concept of standing within somebody else's shoes, obviously, unless you have a sense of what another person is feeling, you cannot stand in their shoes, right? You have to have this ability. And we talk about a mirror neuron system where when we see someone displaying an action, not only pain, but even happiness or awe or gratitude, it elicits something within ourselves. And in fact, this is a mechanism that, because humans require not only an extraordinarily long gestational period, but years and years following their birth to develop, that there has to be a mechanism where they can mimic other people, understand emotions, and develop, if you will, that which makes one human. And a very significant part of that is this ability to feel what others feel. But the issue, though, is it can't just stop there. I'm sure you know Mathieu Ricard, and he's written a number of books, but one of the books he's written is, I believe it's called Happiness, Life's Most Important Skill. But when you talk to Mathieu and look at some of his comments that have been written up in different places, and some of the research associated with him particularly, and him being asked to say, can you use your long, decades-long history of meditation practice, compassion practice, and let us look at you in the MRI and say, okay, we want you to be empathetic. We want you to take on the suffering of another. We want you to experience. Clearly, that has to occur, if you will, before you can then engage to relieve the suffering, because you have to understand it and you have to feel that pain. And one of the statements he makes is that taking on someone else's suffering is like the worst thing in the world. Unless you can dissipate it, either by relieving it or some mechanism, it is a horrible, horrible thing to be in that position. You have to have a method whereby you empathize and then you attempt or have a desire to relieve it, because then you're sort of stuck in this very painful position. So that's probably why I certainly recognize the absolute critical nature of empathy, but it's like part of an equation. The answer to the equation, if you will, or a significant part of the equation, has to do with compassion or the relieving of that suffering. Again, there are other components to this that people talk about. Remember, you also have to choose when you observe an event occurring, and let's say an individual suffering or being harmed, you have to choose whether you're going to withdraw in, if you will, disgust or fear, And this gets back to a very primitive part of your brain, this flight or fight mechanism, where you see yourself potentially at risk. You have to, oftentimes, to be empathetic, you have to see an event occur, determine if it is going to put yourself at risk, or whether, if its very nature results in a disgust response, or whether you're going to ignore that and engage. So that's another critical part. And you know, when you look at different areas of the brain that are associated with these different components, you can actually define them. And what's interesting, of course, as you well know, is that once somebody's empathetic and once somebody engages to be compassionate, if you will, or desire to alleviate another's suffering, what happens? You see those parts of the brain associated with reward, rewards such as that with being given food or money, actually light up. We see that when individuals care for others or have a, if you will, sincere desire to see others suffer less, they actually get happier and feel better. You know, we look at our modern society, and again, referring back to this Wisdom 2.0 talk, here in the United States, we consume 25% of the resources, yet are only 300 million people out of the 6 billion people on Earth, yet we have one of the highest incidences of isolation, depression, and loneliness. Yet, like you, I've traveled to a number of places in the world, a lot of them third world countries, and what's extraordinary to me is the depth of happiness and satisfaction and gratitude people in some of the most horrible or depressed economic areas, how they are. And what an amazing contrast. We're here where we have everything, we have nothing. Because unless you have a social connection, unless you have a sense of community, unless you care about other people, most people are not happy. And that's just a fact. And people run around, and we see it very commonly here in Silicon Valley where I am and in other affluent places. People who are trying to feel this deep sense of emptiness and hollowness by buying things or having things. And the reality is that, while this may result in a short-term bump, if you will, in your dopamine levels, in the sense of feeling good, it is very, very short-lived. It's in those situations where you actually have done something for another, where you see this sort of sustained sense of well-being or happiness. You know, I use the example oftentimes, think of a time when you yourself were either in pain, were suffering, or had a desire for something that you had exhausted every resource to get and was causing you deep pain. And think about how you feel in that situation. And I've been there. I know exactly how it feels. You feel isolated. You feel unloved. You feel that there may not be a God, or if there is, you're being punished. It's as if the clouds have gone gray and there's no sunlight. You feel alone. And what a horrible place to be. But what happens when you're in that position and suddenly somebody saves you? In a second, there is a transformation, or a microsecond, a transformation where you suddenly go from this very deep, dark place and sense of bleakness to where the clouds are parted, the sun is shining, you feel loved, you feel that you're important, you feel that people care about you, you feel that you deserve this all along, and in fact there was always a God, and he loves you. And the other side of this is all of us have been in a position where we have seen someone suffering, and even through as small of an act as paying for bus fare for somebody or helping them change a flat tire, have relieved their suffering. And for many people, they will recall that event not only for the few minutes beyond, but for days to weeks to months to years to beyond, where they have intervened to help another person, and they recreate that very deep, warm sense within themselves that they were connected to somebody and that they had a purpose and that their actions meant something to someone. And those are the things that are life-affirming. Those are the things that people want at their deepest level. It cannot be obtained by buying a new car, a new purse, a big house, flaunting your wealth. It just doesn't happen. And unfortunately, so many people are lost, though, and they keep trying to find ways to feel better, and they keep upping the ante, whether it's by doing some of the actions I described, by acquiring things, whether it's through the use of drugs, whether it's through actually acts of cruelty, whereby hurting others, or by doing negative actions, you somehow get a sense of superiority or that you're better than somebody. These are hollow efforts that get you nothing. It's like you're running around trying to fill a void, but all the methods you're using to fill that void or get that sense of nourishment have 0 calories. And it's the challenge, though, is I was having a conversation actually with Soren Gordhammer, who's the founder of Wisdom 2.0, and he made a very insightful comment, I thought, regarding why it's so hard for people to get out of this. And his comment was, well, to escape prison, you have to first recognize you're in a prison. And if you have no insight or have never understood these types of social interactions and their import, well, how can you be expected to understand how to act in a different way or a more positive way? I mean, I can recite to you, and I'm sure you can to me, innumerable examples of such. One that comes to mind immediately is, you look at the prison population, where we have, as an industrialized country, one of the highest rates of incarceration compared to population, which is extraordinary here in the United States. And while there's certainly bad people, no question, some people who were fundamentally bad at their core, the vast, vast majority of people, I would submit to you, who are incarcerated are not there because they're bad people. They're incarcerated because they have not been shown love and compassion in their lives. And one example of a program that has had a huge impact, or maybe even a couple, one is this program where they actually teach prisoners how to train service animals. And these are prisoners who, again, have been incarcerated for a variety of crimes, and then they're given the responsibility of helping to train a service animal for another person. And they go through this whole program, and what they learn, number one, by engaging with this animal where they have the responsibility of taking care of, they're put in a position where someone needs them. And that in and of itself brings out these innate qualities, if they're guided correctly, of showing love and care and compassion for something else that's vulnerable, like themselves early on at some point in their lives.
It's a way for them to transform their isolation. I mean, transcend their own isolation by seeing someone and contributing to someone else's well-being.
Well, exactly, and by helping this animal and training it, they're learning how to give to another and see the positive effect of that type of engagement. But the other amazing thing is how they feel after they've done this, and then they give that away. That service animal to the person who's going to benefit from it. Mm-hmm. And this whole, if you will, cycle has a huge positive impact because it brings out what was always there, but it's been put in the context of a program that recognizes their dignity. It recognizes their ability to, if you will, go beyond themselves. It recognizes the power of redemption. You know, during my talk and other talks I've given, I talk about my own background. I grew up in poverty with a father who was an alcoholic and a mother who was an invalid. My family was on public assistance my entire life. We moved from place to place. There was some degree of intermittent violence. And, you know, when you're in a situation where every day you wake up is one of despair and hopelessness, who can be blamed for it? Without certain intervening events happening to myself, it is just as likely that I could have been in that prison. And because I certainly have engaged in very negative behaviors to myself. And in fact, I still have some of the baggage of those being in that situation. And it's not to say my baggage is worse than anybody else's. All of us have significant baggage. And it is what makes us who we are. But that baggage is also what makes you act in certain ways as well. And I use an analogy oftentimes of this idea of wounds of the heart. The stuff that I was describing that impacted who I became or how I felt or my own degree of suffering, these are all wounds of our heart. And for most of us, these wounds are superficial and they heal quickly. But there are other ones that are very, very deep. And they don't heal in a day, a week, a month. In fact, for many people, they last an entire lifetime. And it is that pain that individuals have from those wounds. It is that baggage that is always with them, that they have not given up, that results in a whole variety of behaviors. And this can be gone backward, if you will, to see how such has had an impact on war, violence, poverty, a whole variety of things. And the thing that allows individuals to overcome this, if you will, or heal these wounds, or get rid of this baggage, is a recognition that they're not bad, that the suffering they've endured is not their fault, that they have dignity, that there's hope for them. And when they're given love and compassion, these people oftentimes will completely blossom and turn into people you do not even recognize. And I have seen this over and over and over again. And it is a truism. And if we looked at our prison system like that, what's fascinating here is that we have a significant number of people in our country living in poverty. Yet we have the money to pay $30,000 to $50,000 a year to incarcerate a person who has a recidivism rate of 70 to 80%. It is an insult to their humanity. It's an insult to our humanity. It is an insult to the human condition. We have the ability to find $1 trillion a year to participate in a war of which there are going to be no winners and only losers, yet we cannot find funds to pay our teachers adequately, to educate our children, to support our infrastructure, and to do a whole variety of simple acts that would benefit humanity and the world. And it is a sad, sad commentary on our society today. You know, you talked about individuals commenting on what is empathy, what a waste, et cetera, et cetera. You know, unfortunately, it is easy to, and it is human nature to want to participate in an in-group. And when you have an in-group, that means there is an out-group. And there is a certain mindset that says, well, I don't mind services or rewarding people in my in-group, but for either the non-believers or those who have sexual orientation or live in poverty, because if they're in poverty, they deserve to live in poverty. That's how they got there. All of these are manifestations of a lack of enlightenment and a recognition that all of us are connected. And until we recognize that fact, we are fundamentally doomed. There is not going to be anyone left. You know, when you talk about some of these issues, and I'm probably going to not say it the correct way, but I'll paraphrase. You know, in Nazi Germany, you know, there's a statement that, well, you know, when they came for the Poles, I did nothing. When they came for the homosexuals, I did nothing. When they came for the gypsies, I did nothing. When they came for the Jews, I did nothing. Then when they came for me, there was no one. All of those people who create this separation, which is artificial, and somehow say that this group does not deserve to be saved. This group does not deserve to have attention paid to them. They're going to find themselves with no one to save them.
Well, I look inside of myself at, you know, what that alienation and that aloneness is. And for me, I sense it for a sense of protection. You know, it's like wanting to protect myself, you know, from maybe not being heard or not being seen or being judged. And I can feel myself kind of closing off to kind of protect myself. So, and that seems like a, you know, like a valid thing in life that, you know, I think you talked about vulnerability. There was something on that we were having a little dialogue about, and you said, you know, we need to have vulnerability in sharing ourselves, and that's kind of really the gateway to connection, which...
Well, I think you're right, and I think it is part of the human condition to have anxiety. And, you know, again, if you look at our development as a species, we started with the nuclear unit, if you will, of the male, female, and the children, and this did not serve us well and put us at risk. So then we had the small tribes or small groups of people, and the very survival of those groups depended on the individual participating in, if you will, normative behavior or a set of requirements to protect the group. The other interesting side of that, though, was that in that context, because the group was so small, if you were in pain or suffering, you couldn't hide. It was self-evident. Your behavior or lack of not fulfilling certain responsibilities to the community was obvious, and the problem was dealt with immediately, and you then resumed your position. and you were
my partner picks up on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing is, though, that this is a deep thing within us. And when you talk about, geez, you know, I withdraw within myself when I have these feelings, and I just, perhaps you want to be around people who have your worldview or you feel are like you. And that's what everybody wants. But the problem is, though, that while that manner of behavior served us millennia ago, or many, many millennia ago, in a globalized world, it is not going to serve us well. And in fact, if you look at our DNA, it has not changed for the last 100,000 years, if not longer. We are exactly like we were 100,000 years ago. Yet, we are in a modern society where we are immersed in immense amounts of data, distractions, events happening. And we were not made for this. And in fact, one of the problems with stress and some of these other issues is that our flight or fight mechanism, which was designed to be engaged for a very brief period of time, is always engaged, because there is a sense that there may be a threat here or there. And one of the problems is that there is a disconnect between, if you will, our sympathetic nervous system, which is engaged when we have a sense of threat or risk or vulnerability, and our parasympathetic system, which, when it's enhanced, if you will, results in us feeling more connected to individuals, acting more pro-social, having a generalized sense of calmness. This system is out of balance in our modern world. And one of the things that these compassion practices can do is actually put you back, if you will, in balance, such that you're not always stressed out, such that you're not always feeling a threat, such that you look at other people and desire to engage. I know individuals who have been in cubicles next to people for years, and they know nothing about those people. Not a thing. They may know their name, they say see a picture up on the wall, but fundamentally at a deep level, they know nothing about these people. Yet, you know as well as I do from your own personal experience, you have issues going on every day. Whether it's a fight with your partner, whether it's a financial issue, whether it's some event going on with your job, and these, all of which really make you feel anxious. And yet, what do most of us have to take care of that? You know, in the quote-unquote old days, if you will, there was a nuclear family, in fact, an extended family. Most people lived in proximity to where they were born. They lived in proximity to their parents, their grandparents, their children, and they had responsibility within that community structure for certain actions. And all of those things created this sense of well-being. And we don't have that anymore. Well, how do you create that in this modern world? And I think that's the struggle. There was a study, which I've mentioned in the past, where it looked at teenage girls who were stressed, and then how they responded to interacting in person with their mother, talking to their mother on the phone, and lastly, texting their mother. And the first two resulting in significant increases in baseline levels of oxytocin, which many people call the bonding or nurturing or love hormone. While with texting, there was none. What is the substitute in our modern society where we don't live with our close relatives, where we don't necessarily have close relationships with those around us? And I think that is the challenge for our modern society. I think at the end of the day, it in great part is going to have to do, if you will, in promoting this culture of compassion or empathy and giving people tools that allow them to potentiate that, and putting in the context of what's the return on investment with doing this, and laying out in a very clear way what that is in terms of life enhancement, in terms of longevity, in terms of psychological and physiologic health. One of the things that has interested me actually is to create, if you will, a compassion gymnasium where, and I believe we have all the necessary ability to do it, whereby a person goes through, if you will, a psychological profile to understand, based on their particular background and interest, what resonates with them at a deep level as a human being, and then create a customized exercise, compassion exercise program. And we know, whether it's physical exercise or mental exercise, that repetition and the creation of a habit go hand in hand. And by creating such a customized fitness program where, like at the gym, you know, you go in and you can see you go from pressing 250 pounds to 350 pounds, we have a measure that shows people through certain types of testing that they're actually improving their compassion or pro-social behavior or engagement. And also you even ask their family members or colleagues to come in and say, have you noticed a discernible change based on X, Y, and Z? So the person can see how they're positively benefiting. And also as part of this, you have a mechanism where if, let's say, you come in to begin your exercise program and it's evident through, let's say, a series of 5 or 10 questions that, geez, you know, you're really stressed at this moment, or you need to calm down, or you're really not focused on this, then we give you, if you will, a pre-exercise series of exercises so that we make sure that you are engaged and get the maximum benefit from that. And then I believe that once somebody sees how positive a benefit, then hopefully that will have them continue going forward, and, if you will, enlarging what they define as their in-group. I don't see this as being easy, and you pointed out some of the difficulties. And it is. But again, I would admit to you that at the end of the day, unless we do this, unless there is a culture of compassion, our species is doomed. Now, some people might say, well, there have been mass extinctions of a variety of species, and maybe as much as we would like to look at this from an egotistical, self-serving point of view, that somehow we are at the epitome of evolution, whether that's true or not, if we cause mass extinction of the human race, well, there you have it. I would like to believe that there is something special and important about why we have evolved to this point, why, if you will, we have a theory of mind, why we're able to look at another person and have, if you will, an internal analysis of what that person is, and it is retained within us, how we have certain feelings about people. I would like to believe that there is a reason for that, and that the reason is that we are all connected. I was recently down at Sages and Scientists, which is a conference that Deepak Chopra puts on, and Deepak asked me to give a talk. And this conversation was about quantum consciousness. And they were talking about particle entanglement. And I said, well, I'm not a physicist. What I do know is that we're all entangled. And the fundamental core of that entanglement is love. And until we connect with that, we will continue to have significant issues.
Well, one of the things I look at around this building a culture of empathy is having the vision, having that there's a vision of that. And I think you've for me, you've really laid it out that, and had kind of shared the emotional quality, essence of that vision. It's having that deep connection and kind of transcending the loneliness or alienation that is so rampant in society. And you've kind of laid out all the different, some of the ways. It's an ongoing quest, but you've laid out so many different ways of how we can start using science and all these other ways of mindfulness, of how we can start building that, working towards that vision of deeper connection.
Well, I'm going to have to run here, but maybe in closing, I can just comment that, you talked about being vulnerable, and there's this immense anxiety among many people that by showing your vulnerability...
I have my anxieties too.
Well, and by showing that you have anxieties or are vulnerable, that somehow this is perceived often by individuals that this lessens them, or that they won't be accepted, or they won't be loved, or people will abandon them. And as a physician and personally, I have never experienced that. In fact, the more I show that I am vulnerable and care and am in pain, the more people reach out to me to embrace me. And I think it is universally true, because that is the nature of human beings. And sure, are there exceptions? Absolutely. But generally speaking, when people show their vulnerability, they often are perceived as being somebody worth caring about. And it's funny, because I make a comment sometimes that, we all carry this weight, if you will, of trying to show people that we have our act together, that we're with it, that we don't have fear, that we're not anxious. And there is a huge psychological cost of carrying that weight. People say, geez, what's it like to be around the Dalai Lama, of which I've had the privilege of being around a fair amount. And what I tell them is, here I'm at Stanford, and Stanford can be a very competitive environment, and in fact, in some ways can be a very cold environment. When you're with somebody like the Dalai Lama, or practitioners like him, who have spent a great deal of time trying to promote their own compassion, then what happens is this weight that I'm talking about is suddenly lifted, and you feel incredibly happy. And I think that is what people will find, number one, when they open their hearts and they realize that, in fact, we're all the same.
Well, thank you, Jim. This has been a wonderful dialogue here, and really grateful that you took the time to from your busy day to in your scrubs
Actually, my assistant's knocking at my door, telling me I'm not seeing my patients. So now,
okay. So then, yeah. So okay, then I look forward to continuing this dialogue. I think it's an ongoing quest, and glad to have an empathy, compassion buddy to do this quest with. So look forward to our next talk, and say onward to your next patient.
Okay, and many blessings to you, Edwin, and keep up the good work. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.